like to kick things off.
Yeah. Hi. Well, I think our session here is overlaps slightly the previous one, but we're looking more at the infrastructure side of things. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Rick Chandler. I'm billed here as the Treasurer and DPO for EMA, which is the European Identity Security Association. 34 years old, running currently, I think, 4 Horizon 2020 identity-related projects. Currently running our ISSE conference in sync with this, if anybody wants to look. I also chair the Communications Management Association, which is representing business telecoms users, and it's 65 years old and has over time influenced a lot of the decisions made by UK government and regulators. So it gives me a seat at the Ofcom stakeholders group and things like that. So there's an interesting overlap here for me. I'll let the speakers introduce themselves. Ravneet, Suresh and Mark, all of us have, as Laura said earlier on, stepped up to fill a gap. So, but I hope it doesn't look too much like that. You just have to forgive me for looking at my notes, that's all. So,
yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Ravneet, VP of Engineering at Alika Bank, and Alika Bank is more like a digital bank for established SMEs, and we have a range of products like commercial mortgages, deposits, asset finance, and we're launching a payment account next year. So how is this related is like when we talk to a customer, so we need to validate their identity, make sure that the right people have access to the data they're looking for, and I would just extend it to the employees as well. So with the public cloud, so they access the applications and different services that bank provides. So how do we know that our employees are accessing it? So that's the main focus that I'd have for the panel. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah. Hi everyone, Suresh Patel. I'm the VP of EMEA here at Telesign. Telesign, for those of you who may not have heard of it, if you've had a message from Facebook or Microsoft or Amazon, it probably would have been sent by Telesign. So what we're actually leaders in not only messaging but also in digital identity, mainly based around phone numbers. And what we're able to do is help organizations when it comes to onboarding or spotting account takeover, look at the metadata around the phone number to help brands make informed decisions about onboarding or checking that people are still in ownership of the account that they had when they onboarded. So that's us.
and Mark.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Hain. My billing here is as the co-chair of one of the working groups in the OpenID Foundation, but I do have a couple of other personas. So I'm also running a small boutique digital identity security consultancy. My history is working at financial services organisations around the UK, some of the big banks, and more widely than that, I've got work going on with a European bank as well at the moment, working in mainly customer identity and open banking or related things.
Okay, right. Well, from your different perspectives, actually, why do you think digital identity is such a key security consideration for businesses these days?
So for thinking from a bank perspective, so we are providing different applications, mobiles and online web applications to our customers, and we need, every time they access it, so it's more like an entry, so it's part of the digital transformation. They don't come to our branches and provide their identities or the cards or identification documents. It's more like how we can authenticate and authorize them that they have the right access to the data and different services. So that's where it comes, and I think it's a security consideration because we don't want to expose someone else's data to some other customer. So it's like we are protecting the banks or the organizations by providing, by using these identity services, as well as protecting the customers and employees. So it's just a protection layer that so it's the protection layer between the customers, the banks, and the organization. So that's where I see it as. So although we specialize in products, but it's a mandatory requirement that I see as a, yeah.
We'll talk about onboarding in a minute.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important, I guess there's a couple of points here. Research that we saw, there was about 53 billion in fraud around identity. And I think about 14 of it was traditional access in breaking into systems, and about 43 was around consumer fraud. So this is when the consumers have been defrauded in some way through their identity. So from that perspective, the biggest threat, it appears, to enterprise is actually coming through the customers that they have and the vulnerability they have. So from our perspective, I think what we think is that that's the area that needs to be addressed. And obviously with everything going online over the last couple of years, that issue is becoming greater and greater. And that's an area of vulnerability. And I think that's the area that we need to think about for consumers who are ultimately paying the bills for all of us, is helping them cope with these kinds of issues.
Yeah, so for me, the necessity of putting the appropriate controls in place, knowing who you're dealing with, and making sure that they're under control of what they're doing is vital. But there's another element to this as well, which is actually giving your organisation a competitive advantage when dealing with customers. I'm seeing quite a lot of work going into that intersection of digital identity and user experience. And if you, as a bank or whatever organisation, can deliver a slicker, quicker user experience, then your net promoter score with customers is going to go up. Mm-hmm. And I think, for me, the really interesting thing is the twin imperatives of delivering security and a customer experience that's appealing. Ultimately, people want something that's convenient.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were talking earlier on, the OWASP top 10 risks at the moment. Broken access is actually now the number one. And in talking, filling up on your point there, I mean, what can the brands do to reduce that onboarding friction associated with the new technologies without compromising that security? Are you managing to implement the new services and the new without compromising the friendliness and the user interface of the actual access?
So considering the security, I think the ways of working within the organizations have changed a bit. So security testing, when we developed the application, it used to be the last part. Basically, that security is validated, but now everybody is more focused towards shifting left, as in like you introduce your security threat modeling when you design your infrastructure and architecture. So to protect, the security is your main focus at number one. So if you're building the APIs, are you looking into the authentication and authorization, how you protect those APIs? If you're building the infrastructure, new architecture in the cloud, for example, so the security has become the primary concern. And obviously moving towards agile ways of working. So how do we, as a team, how do we bring those security concerns? So are we looking into OWASP 10 at, it's just not OWASP 10, all the guidelines that OWASP produce for our teams, engineers, or probably who are building the infrastructure or the application. So how do we inculcate that within the design, analysis, and the development process? So that it's a responsibility of everybody. And I think everybody's aware of that, and they're bringing in the new policies and processes to protect ourselves. So that's where I see the difference.
I think as we think about it from the perspective of, I guess, coming back to who's paying the bills. So the marketing team, advertising team, they spend millions. just trying to get the customer, attract the customer to the portal in the first instance, and then try to get them through that customer journey. And again, with everything going online over the last couple of years, or increasingly so, we have seen that brands have to become more protective and cautious, and then we start to see some more hurdles being put in place. So pretty much once the customers got almost to the the time to make their decision to buy or to finish their applications, they get thrown all these identification points, proof of identity, and we see a big drop-off. We work with many brands who are onboarding, especially a lot of the neobanks with their apps, and we see a huge drop-off as they go through that onboarding funnel. So if I'm sitting there owning the P&L of a brand and I'm putting all these marketing dollars in and then seeing a huge drop-off because my process is creating friction, well, then how do we address that? And we've tried to think about that at Telesign. And, the checks that we offer brands are, what we call invisible checks. That we work with some of our partners to deliver this. And these are checks that don't appear on the consumer's credit report, for one. And they can happen in background, in real time, during the customer journey process. So it doesn't feel that we're inhibiting that process and creating friction, but the brand gets the information that it needs to then decide, okay, I have enough data points on this particular individual that I'm comfortable with them going down a lesser friction route. With this particular individual, some of the data elements might be suggesting that I need to put more checks in place.
As we heard on the last panel, there's that, all of that, if you like, the credentials that you're using aren't necessarily the credentials that the customer's aware of or have even consented to. And I think that there is okay, so you're easing some of the friction by doing that. It's a very difficult road to go along, whether is this good or not. I mean, it is really a new area. I mean, are you, how are these new innovative identity technologies being integrated into the existing architectures, and basically what are the challenges from the other side of building that in without compromising the security?
So I'm going to jump in here and share a bit about what's been going on in the standards space. That is my primary job today, to be fair. So in the OpenID Foundation, there's been an awful lot of work going on to take OpenID Connect to the next level, essentially. 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, it was really something that had been born out of the developments around APIs and some of the more kind of or lower risk use cases were being addressed through the use of OpenID Connect. So quite a lot of social media stuff was using OpenID. But what happened as a partnership between open banking, the banks in the UK, the fintechs in the UK, and the OpenID Foundation was taking OpenID Connect to the next level. And there was an awful lot of work done to develop the financial grade API profile. And essentially what that does, hopefully I'm not repeating this for people who understand, it takes OAuth and OpenID Connect as the baseline and provides a very, very clear set of rules to deliver those protocols in a way that's secure enough for financial services and other sensitive data to be handled.
Are you seeing more and more uptake in that? Is the awareness good enough?
So the awareness is definitely getting there. Certainly in the kind of open banking, open finance sort of space, there's quite a lot of Me Too action. We're seeing Brazil and Australia and Russia effectively taking up that standard. What I would add as well is, aside from just having a standard, we've got best practices in place around that. There was analysis done of the protocol and some improvements identified in partnership with the University of Stuttgart. They actually built a formal threat model and then did a formal assessment of the protocol against the threat model. So that's all available online for people to review if you've got the academic capabilities to read that paper. It's quite deep. I think this all helps the likes of an engineering team deliver something secure at the end of the day. On top of that, once you've done your kind of design and development processes, the OpenID Foundation also supplies a conformance testing tool and self-certification capability. So that then allows you to, once you've built it all up and put it into perhaps a test environment, maybe one day we'll do this in production as well, you're actually able to check that you've implemented as per the specification.
You're saying
as
you've got
well.
tools to test it.
Yeah, it tests and assures you that you've implemented it correctly, and that gives you some confidence about the security and quite a lot of confidence about interoperability with other parties that are going to have to interact with your APIs.
Yeah. Are you getting any feedback to say that the other side are actually finding it easier to do the onboarding? I mean, it's as you said,
so
there's a lot. The credit reference agencies, everybody knows about what they do and whatever. All the other stuff that's going on.
I mean, I'd like, just to chip in there quickly. What we try to do, we try to provide APIs, and we get data, our own data, plus we get data from other authorized sources that then we can provide to businesses, and hopefully through a simple API. And then using Cloud, we provide ubiquity of these APIs on a global basis. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to make that security assessment more accessible to more businesses. Yeah. And doing it in this way, and with low latency APIs, hopefully more businesses, not just fintechs and banks, but more businesses across the sphere will be able to utilize these things. Because I come back to the point about how do we protect the consumers, not just the money, but everything they do in every aspect of their life. And the more we can make these APIs available and do them in a way that's sensitive to the standards that you're talking about there as well, but try to make it more convenient for engineering teams to incorporate these things, and then maintain the low friction, but provide all of the robustness that we're looking for as well.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, just to add on that, so obviously we talked about the OpenID Connect. So based on last few years, I've seen that people are more aware of those protocols now. So they have started adopting. So all the greenfield projects that we are having is using the OpenID Connect protocol rather than going for the API keys that we were using traditionally. I think it provides an extra level of security on the consumers and on the consumers of your APIs, because you can regularly rotate your secrets and keys, and that just alleviates the risk of your keys being compromised. So yeah,
So you think these third-party APIs are driving increased adoption, etc. But how does one know which APIs to trust and which not?
I beg your pardon?
I mean, how does one know which APIs to trust and which not? I mean, that's probably a bit for you as well.
So it's quite a broad topic. So it's like you can't segregate which APIs to trust and which not. So it's more like, I think the API consumers and API producers, it's more like what protocol. So what is the security policy that they have applied? And it would be separate for each organization as well. But how many of them they adhere to the standards, the OpenID Connect standards, or any best practices for security related? I think that's the key thing, or key determinant, and probably the tools that Mark was talking about. Maybe that would give us an extra assurance whenever we go and start consuming those APIs, maybe a quick test in production that would give us extra assurance there.
I'm actually going to add another thought here as well. So there's an organization that I'm aware of just emerging. It's called the API Ratings Agency. And they're starting to develop the concept of giving an independent assessment of APIs based on a set of criteria, which I think is incomplete so far. But it will cover domains such as performance and availability, the level of documentation, how conformant to the standards that they claim to comply with, and critically, the level of security. Now, there's quite a journey to go on that front, but I think it does address the question you're asking, which is how do you know which APIs to use? From a consumer perspective, that's not a terribly valid question because you're just using an app. But from an app that's consuming APIs from around the industry, you might want to pick one over another because it's got a better
'Cause
score.
I've been working in if you like, the smart cities IoT space, and there are some quite well-known compromises of APIs in that space,
Yeah.
like people taking over autonomous vehicles and whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
I can see a similar thing happening in the personal data related space as well.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine, actually a security researcher, who found a vulnerability in a well-known charging network, and he could have turned on all the chargers at the same time. That might have had a couple of consequences.
I mean, we're talking about the open APIs. What about the multiple clouds now? Particularly in the working from home environment, you know, you take your nicely protected business laptop home on your carefully secured network connection to your business, and then all of a sudden the kids are going to do their homework because they're working from home as well and whatever. I mean, are you seeing new demands or new technologies and whatever helping with that, or is it still a very...
So I think previously, before this remote working concept, we used to work within an office, VPN, so virtual private networks. So obviously with remote working, we need access to internal networks of the organizations. We've been looking into multiple tools for providing those, giving a seamless experience to the developers, but having still running a VPN at the background to protect the devices. But I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, especially with public cloud. So we had a vulnerability being released by, we had a vulnerability in Azure cloud a month ago, I guess, so which exposed certain services to external maybe, I'm not sure like if there was any bad actor or not, but that was something that's happened, and we can't deny that. And it's more on, I think what we advocate is a zero trust policy across, that you don't trust anything else other than you, so you need to find out a way to protect your own self. That's what we have it's not like we have introduced, it's already been advocated across the industry, and which the organizations are adopting, so yeah.
I mean,
I think if I take the consumer view again, lots of consumers don't have access to the resources that we all talk about as employees of large companies. And as an industry, we need to make people feel much more comfortable that when they do access the services online, that their security, their identity, that all this is taken seriously. And as we expand globally as well, you know, the resources, the infrastructure changes again. So we see lots of countries where we operate a mobile first. And in those instances, what we've seen is that actually the mobile phone and checking the mobile phone number is the way to go in a lot of instances.
Well, in that context, I mean, UK is probably one of the few countries in the world where you can go and buy a SIM without authenticating yourself in any way. I think we're probably one of the only ones. So, you know, what value is a phone number if I could go and buy one in 5 minutes?
I mean, and that's I'm just a shameless plug here about some of the services that we provide, because we provide a trust score for telephone numbers. We have about 6 billion telephone numbers that we monitor through our fraud consortium. So we're able to provide a rating of 1 to 1,000 for pretty much any telephone number on a global basis. And that's updated, you know, in near real time. So for a brand, when they're looking at that telephone number, they can very quickly tell, again, should I put this customer down a higher path of resistance or lower path of resistance? But it's you know, bring it all together with the APIs and all of this information. Companies will take all these different data points into account to then prescribe, hopefully.
How often do you recheck, though? Because, I mean, somebody was telling me on one of the stands yesterday that he's quite surprised to see his new washing machine appeared on his home network. Now, there's no idea what the vulnerabilities are to that or why it's there. And as people add more devices to their home or take devices away, the whole infrastructure changes, and they're not aware to the extent to which you're using that information to authenticate onto banking services. So, how often do you recheck? Or
So with our fraud consortium, it's near real time. So as one of our customers, you imagine we serve 21 out of 25 of the largest internet brands that we can all think of quite easily. Yeah. So as a new fraudster comes along, a malicious actor with a phone number that could have been a prepaid or burner phone from wherever, tries to use that phone, they will access pretty much all of his internet services at the same time, knowing they have a window before brands will react to the fact that there's something fraudulent going on. With our fraud consortium, we'll see that, like I say, in pretty much in near real time. So we were able to update our score for that phone number.
Yeah. I'll just Laura, do you want me to see if there's any questions from the floor? Only, otherwise we can plow on into
a question from the floor, so just coming over. There you go.
Thanks very much. I liked what you had to say, Suresh, about we have to convince consumers that, but the problem is we rightfully distrust every transaction on the internet because it's just become ubiquitous, the over-collection of information. And that's not any individual's fault, it's an environmental flaw. Like, if I just want to buy a simple thing and I want to give you my credit card, why are you asking for my email and address and then sending them an email? Be our friend. There's an underlying issue that the entire industry has to pull up its socks, slap itself in the face and say, stop asking for so much damn information. And what do you see that gives you hope that that might happen? I mean, I get the KYC journey for a bank, absolutely. But
I absolutely agree. And as we talk to many online brands about their onboarding, one of the things that we always talk about is progressive onboarding. So only ask for the information that you need if it's going to help you fulfill that transaction. And if you are going to have a longer relationship with that consumer, then ask for more information as time goes on. And then you can learn to trust them and they can learn to trust you. But I absolutely agree. I mean, too many brands ask for too much information up front. They don't justify to consumers why they're asking for it. And therefore, as any consumer would, you put in synthetic data. And then that makes the next part of the journey even harder because you base it on bad data. So I think as an industry, yes, definitely more education around progressive onboarding would be quite useful.
I was going to say, on that score, I mean, we live in a surveillance capitalist society, and I don't know if it's generational. I really resist that. I do everything I can not to answer those questions. I always go through and check all the cookies I'm happy with receiving, etc. But other people, other generations are totally open about it. However, I'm quite pleased to think that there's an organisation like both of these gentlemen out there looking at what surveillance is going on and try and leveraging it into a standardised and regulated form. And I think we've got a long journey to go on that. We've got a new information commissioner. We've got all sorts of other potential things going on. But I think it's got to move fast. That's the thing. Any more questions? Dan.
So what comes first, Facebook's metaverse or a passwordless internet?
I didn't catch that one.
What was the first option?
What comes first, Facebook's metaverse or a passwordless internet?
You want to answer that? I'm currently in the process where I've got a day job with UCL, and we are building in fact we start in 2 weeks' time, a 3-month demonstration of Homes 2050. And we're assuming a metaverse. We'd actually got it in our scope before the phrase was used by Facebook. But I think a lot of Suresh's technologies and the stuff that's going on in the banks to monitor those I was going to say credentials is the wrong word, but behavioural traits, biometrics, everything, and have an automatic interreaction with that. But we need ways of trusting AI. We need ways of having the surveillance go on in a regulated way, as we said earlier, without compromising the performance, the usability, and also the security. But in terms of which comes first,
Well, I'm going to give my
go
answer.
on. Yeah, go on.
In my personal case, it'll be passwordless internet because I won't be doing the metaverse. I'm too old for that, I think.
I think probably if metaverse is going ahead, so they would think about the passwordless first. So yeah.
I'm with you guys on passwordless internet, but ultimately it comes down to the commercials and who's driving it. If someone's driving it with enough momentum behind them and enough of a value proposition for ultimately us as consumers, then it's going to be, standards will almost have to fall in line with whatever the market's going, but try to do it in a very responsible way.
But we go up a ramp, don't we? Multiple factor authentication. We're moving now from 2 to 3 factor. I think we're going to get more and more automatic biometric authentications go on, like a gate, where we go, our routes to work, all the rest of it, are all actively being monitored without our knowledge, which are key factors. I remember Kim Cameron making a presentation, must be 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know if you know Kim, he was Microsoft's architect of identity at the time. And he put his hand on his phone in his pocket. He said, "My phone knows who I am." And I think that's where we're going. We'll have some sort of cobot-like partner that is our online interface that looks after us. And we will authenticate ourselves to that, and it will do the hard work in the background. But I think we're nearly there with that.
Those of us that operate in this rarefied world of wealth and privilege and technological capability, just like to remind everybody, there's people out there who are not remotely interested in this.
Well, that's a good question.
My taxi driver didn't have a bank account until last year, and he didn't really want one. It was just too much trouble. So,
And I haven't used cash for 2 months.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I'd be interested in your viewpoint as a bank.
So, as a bank, so basically we have different kind of segments of customers. So some are like tech savvy, and some they don't want to use the mobile phones or don't have the mobile phones for the second factor authentication, and we use a VoIP call on the landline. So we in the recent past, I was quite surprised to see that kind of, so we have that segment of customers that we need to look after. And if we introduce more complexities in the onboarding and the identification of those customers, then so are we saying that we won't be able to provide them the services that they need? So obviously we don't want to reach there. So it's a nice balance. We have talked a lot about the SSIs and DDIs, so federated identities. What makes me think is we are going for a digital transformation, obviously for last many years. So we had a digital transformation, but the digital transformation for asking about the documents went from a physical copy to a digitally scanned copy. So that's where we need to think about. So we should have a digital signature probably, rather than keeping a photocopy or in a scanned document folder. So I think that needs to be thought through. So we still, as a bank, we ask about the copies of like a photocopy of, or not a photocopy, more like a scanned copy of the passport and the driving license, rather than, but we don't have the right infrastructure for that. No. So I think that would drive a change if we think more about the more innovation in that sector, where we say like, okay, so government has issued a passport, but that's more like a digital QR code, for example, and we validate, okay, this customer has a valid passport, rather than storing the documents.
So that's the driver behind the OpenID Foundation working group that I'm co-chairing. It's called eKYC and Identity Assurance. And really, the kind of business vision behind all the technical stuff is to reduce the number of actual evidence verifications that the consumer has to go through, and reuse that digital identity across many different user journeys effectively, whether that's multiple transactions in an organization, or even wider than that, using a reusable digital identity across many interactions with many organizations. That's where I'd like to see the innovation proceed.
Well, I've seen some, I mean, Adobe and Microsoft, I know, are both working on actual validating scanned copies against original copies by basically the content and structure of the document. So you can say, yes, this scanned copy is exactly the same as the other one by digital online techniques. So we're getting there. We're getting there. The people who want to walk in with a scan.
But I think then you end up, as consumers, we think we've got scanned copies of all our important documents on our hard drives and our machines. We've got photos of this on our Google Cloud, on our Apple memories, and it's kind of like I'm putting all of this information, which is my actual personal information, sitting in all these clouds from these Silicon Valley companies. There's got to be a way of making this a lot easier and making us all a lot less vulnerable.
So I mean, that's a good way. I mean, we're having to round up. Where would you see then the next big driver in the next couple of years would be in that space?
I think it's horses for courses. I think, we don't need a sledgehammer to go and make a one-off transaction on the internet for something really small. So I think it's fixing that. It's thinking, what's the use case here? What level of identity do I need for this particular use case versus a full identification for a very significant transaction. And then also making that available to many consumers. Because as you quite rightly said, if you look across the world, there's all kinds of different degrees of access to IT. And the worst thing we can do is to leave people behind. And we're seeing that happening with, as more and more things are going online, older generations are getting left behind because things are getting too complicated, or, we're forced down, are we going to end up with passports for everything, like we're supposed to have COVID passports to go into certain places? We're going to end up with different types of identities to enable us to buy certain services from certain companies.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's massively fractured. Yeah. It's still massively fractured. We need to see some way that delivers the consumer need at the end of the day, which is more convenience. Having your identity documents scattered all over, Dropbox, and Google Drive, and wherever else, is not very convenient and adds to the security risks associated with those things. So solving that problem in a way that meets consumers' needs and gives businesses better reach, and ultimately costs less. Because doing all of these identity assurance processes repeatedly costs an awful lot of money. I think one of my conversations earlier, it doesn't just cost money, it costs carbon as well. If you're running those processes multiple times a year, just think about all the consequences of that. What would be top of your wish list then?
So I think specifically for the identity is so a consolidated place where, so my wish list as a consumer, I would say, is like if I have a digital signature on my phone and I use the same one to authenticate with all the banks, maybe that would be on the top of my wish list. Because if I haven't logged into a particular bank account for say 6 months, then probably I won't remember the password. So or even the username as well. So if it is just a random username.
Okay. I mean, we're starting to see app-to-app authentications. I can pay my credit card bill on my credit card company from my bank account app-to-app now. Fun enough, it didn't work the other way around, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah.
How are we off for time? Are there any online questions I was going to ask?
If there's one more question from the audience, then we've got time. Just down the front.
So people are, as we know, sort of less and less likely or willing to give up their data, but this data is needed for services to continue designing improvements based on real needs and not assumed needs. So do you have any ideas or thoughts of how we encourage people to keep giving up their data, but whilst maintaining their privacy rights?
So that's something that I'm kind of interested in. I think there's two parts to it. One is improving the visibility of how that data is used and being, very transparent about that, and in a way which, again, is focused on how the consumer wishes to approach it. And the second thing is actually giving them the tools to actually feel they have a way of managing that. Again, there was a conversation earlier around this about the effectiveness or not of GDPR. And I feel there's a missing link in there. It's very focused on the obligations of the processors and controllers. And actually, it needs to be improved to make it more customer focused and give people the agency. At the moment, there isn't really agency for, I would say, easily 99% of people.
I mean, I think, as I said earlier on, we live in a surveillance society. Now, a lot of people, I hate that. I've said to Microsoft several times I'd pay a tenner a month more for a browser and a search engine that kept me private. But I think the basic answer is people will have to pay for those services in some other way, either by getting value for the data that they share, or we've discussed this for many years. There's this sort of submitting to the invasion or trading your data for services. But I think that we've missed the boat probably about 4 or 5 years ago when we could have, with people starting to realise about GDPR and the value of their data, we missed the opportunity to say, well, all right, we'll keep it secure, but we're going to charge you. I mean, it's interesting to see that in the UK, the government Verify system is going through another rebranding for access to government services. That's just for secure access to government services. And for most people, they're essentials anyway, not banking services or other online valuable services. So I think that, if you don't pay for it, you're the product, and that's an educational issue, I think.
I mean, just to your point, I think the idea of just making sure that if I'm going to ask you for something, I tell you why I'm asking you for it and how it's going to be used, and be absolutely clear, because it's about building that trust back. As you say, it's quite worrying to think that the only way that we're going to remain anonymous is to have to pay for it. And again, that excludes a lot of people who wouldn't prioritise that. And that's not fair, is it? I
know a lot of people who've tried different techniques to confuse the surveillance. I've got a friend who's quite regularly giving his phone to his teenage son one weekend and his teenage daughter the next weekend. So he's got 3 personas on that phone. And he still gets now the technologies these guys are doing are so good. He still gets his own focused. People don't even know that their TVs are listening to them and things like that. There's a huge educational process going on. Or we start to charge for clean services.
So I think there are a number of tools basically where we, maybe it's just organizations adopting them to mask the data that recognizes more like personally identifiable data, and then there's another set of data that interests everyone that would be used for data analysis and data science. So if we adopt those tools and segregate it, it would just give more comfort to the customer as well, that the data is being used in a right manner without exposing too much information about them. And I think probably that would drive the change, and it's partly education as well, so giving more control to the consumer, how they want their data to be used, that's another part of it.
Yeah. Okay. But I think that's it. I'd like to thank you. I think, does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm just. We're moving on. Thank you, all 3 of you, for that support, and thank you for providing us with the opportunity, even if it was at short notice.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Great.